Welcome to the Frank Figliuzzi Show, and thank you for your patience. You know, sometimes when you're having a show about technology, technology can cause an issue. And here we are. And I have been promising you a show dedicated to AI and data centers, and I'm sure it won't be our last, but it is our first. And I wanted to wait for that first discussion to have a seriously credentialed expert to help us cut through the questions we all have about AI and data centers. And we have that person with us today. I'm excited to have Michael Bennett with us. Real quickly, Michael's expertise spans physics, math, law, science, and technology studies. He has an extensive leadership experience in AI, data science, and innovation strategy across complex organizations. He is the Associate Vice Chancellor for Data Science and AI Strategy, also affiliate faculty at the University of Illinois, Chicago Law. His research focuses on the societal implications, this is where we're going, of emerging technologies like AI and big data and their ethical applications. Yeah, he sounds like the right guy for today. And Michael, thank you for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Frank. Great to see you.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for your patience as well as we kick off with a delay here. Look, as they say, start from the beginning. How did we get, help our viewers and assume a basic, I've got smart, savvy viewers, but we have a ton of questions. So assume only a basic knowledge of what's happening around AI and data centers. Help us understand the linkage between artificial intelligence and data centers, and then how we got to the kind of outrage we're seeing around the country about data centers.
Sure, these are great questions and great places to begin. So the story of generative AI, right? The AI that no one can stop talking about now for more than 3.5 years is a relatively short one compared to data centers. So let's start with the short story. Generative AI, right? When we think about things like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, the technology that underpins that, it's not very old at all. The concept of AI as such goes all the way back to the middle of the 20th century. But what we mean by AI right now stems from a type of mathematically underpinned technology that was developed roughly a decade ago. Google researchers released a paper, Attention is All You Need is what it's called, for the nerdy people in your audience that want to read it. Next year will be its 10-year anniversary. So the concepts aren't very old at all. Right. And they're all based on linear algebra for your super nerdy people. Yeah. Data centers, on the other hand, have been around for decades. We've only recently started to hear a lot of non-experts, non-computer science, non-electrical engineering people talking about this because of that connection that you're pointing to between artificial intelligence and data centers, but nothing connected to, say, virtual education, using learning management systems if you're in the academy like I am, if you're a gamer, if you are someone who sends a lot of texts or uses a lot of cell data to, say, stream shows on your phone, nothing in those categories would be possible without data centers. And that gives you a kind of sense of how long they must have been around.
So we've got, well, all right, so it does seem to us, I hear you loud and clear, this is a relatively recent development over the history of our nation and world. It does seem like the data center thing has been thrust on us because, look, we're human. And so if we don't pay attention until it's in our backyard or proposed to be in our backyard. So that connection helped to just strengthen that link now for us. Why do we need data centers to move forward with AI? What is that symbiotic relationship?
In order to build the type of generative artificial intelligence system that so many of us are using, struggling to understand, and struggling to incorporate into our lives, you need an incredible amount of computational power, right? And so when you're building something like ChatGPT or Claude, it takes a ton of chips. It takes racks and racks of chips to do this, computer chips to do this. And those larger AI companies, the names of which everyone listening to this probably already knows, They need like an extreme form of data center in order to enable those processes, to train those models, to teach them to be AI models essentially, and then as well to run them, to receive, for them to be able to receive all of our questions and to answer them effectively.
Okay, all right. So here we are with social media and the media writ large finally kind of waking up to public interest and even outrage. You mentioned you're from the Academy, University of Illinois, Chicago. Let's play. I got a brief clip of what happens at a graduation commencement ceremony when the speaker mentions AI. Can we play that one, please? Sean, do we have that one up?
Of artificial intelligence is the next industrial revolution. Oh, whoa. What happened?
I love her response to the booze, which is she turns around and goes, "What happened?" And I think that's our topic for today is what is happening, and tell us a couple of things, right? Because I'm the guy, I'm a fact-based evidence guy. I don't want to get caught up in the outrage unless it's well justified and unless I understand how we can mitigate a problem that exists. So you're in the regulatory space as well in terms of research and study. Are we, here's some things I hear about, and then tell us about this. I hear we got to do this because China's going to get out in front of us and it's an existential threat, or we've got, China will kill us if we don't do this. Okay. Number two, I hear data centers use such an outrageous amount of water that it's going to drain us dry. And then I hear, no, that's not true. The water is reused. Then I have stories of older data centers like Virginia that are using generators and polluting the air, and the neighbors have constant noise. Help us with all of that.
So if I had been behind her when she was giving that commencement speech and she had asked that same question, what happened? I would have, to begin, my answer to you, I would have said something like, well, you've used the wrong word with this audience, right? So think about who she's talking to. This is a commencement speech that went viral just probably a month ago or so, right? Like this is a set of students who started college 4 years ago, right? They started college right as this technology was peeking its head over the horizon. Right. They started college when today, 2026, 2027, to them was supposed to be about good prospects for jobs. Right? Yeah. Those students who were in STEM, specifically in computer science and electrical engineering, they had a friction-free path to really great opportunities, as did many of those who were pursuing, say, business degrees or were pre-law. What's happened over those 4 years, right? This technology has come along, and with each iteration, the technology has become better and better at doing the things that those students would have been hired to do in many instances. And so that's one of the reasons that those kids, and probably those boos are probably coming from some parents too. That's one of the reasons that she got that kind of response, right? And so that specific word for that particular audience was just the wrong mix, the wrong combination.
Right.
You're asking as well, though, about the intensity, right? Like this is a visceral response. This is an emotional response. This is not people standing up to articulate, coldly fact-based critiques. This is people getting red in the face, screaming, "I'm very upset," right? And in many instances, acting out as well. And the way that I explain that right now, at least in part, is to say that our basic understanding of the technologies here, right? The various models, our engagement with them, it's just starting to take off. Right. There's still too many of us that have been informed about artificial intelligence more often than not through pop culture,
yes,
than have been informed about how to use this technology and what it does and the pros and cons of it through more formal experiences, either through training on the job or through institutions like ours. We're working to change that, but think about artificial intelligence as it's been expressed in pop culture. We've got literally 100 years worth of these stories. Like I was saying, the term and the concept is born in the mid 20th century, but the first artificial intelligence movie, which was dystopian, that takes us all the way back to Metropolis. That's Fritz Lang in 1927, right? So literally 100 years of stories repeating themselves, saying that when machines start thinking, it's going down the drain. Right. So we've got that kind of pop cultural education that we have to engage with. I think those movies are great. I think the novels are great. I'm a huge science fiction fan, but we need to temper that with reality, with fact-based information.
So if you're that commencement speaker and you want to, at great peril, introduce even the concept of a future with AI, how do you use it? How do you, beyond semantics, more importantly, right? How do you lay that out for a student these days on campus and present the challenge to them?
So one of the things that I do on a pretty regular basis, and many of my colleagues are doing this as well, is that we're trying to turn the technology back on itself for pedagogic reasons, right? And so a fundamental question for academicians that are serious about this is, well, how do we use this technology to teach about the technology? How do we use this technology to inform the students that have come to us for guidance about how to move out into the world as adults? And then when you're at a public institution like mine that has a serious responsibility and connection to one of the largest cities in the country, that kind of message needs to be sent out to citizens at large too. And so I'm not sure that I would have delivered an AI themed commencement speech, even though this is my bread and butter. Yeah. But I think I would have maybe later on in the speech said something about how I used artificial intelligence to do meaningful things, not just in preparation for that talk.
Yes.
But, I've used it to create learning plans for my 12-year-old daughter.
Yes.
I've used it to help me re-engage with things that, say, I haven't studied in 10 or 20 years that I need to get up to speed on.
Got it.
Right? I mean, they're practical ways to fold it into life. And so I think I would have given examples like those.
Right. So to kind of frame this discussion, it seems to me, tell me if I'm wrong, that look, this is here to stay. It's growing exponentially. It's coming at us at warp speed. And the answer is not necessarily to say, I reject this outright, but rather to figure out its place in our society and then bring it close to home. What is the answer to is the answer regulation? If so, what does that look like? And give me the truths and the untruths about water, lies about jobs. Is this really going to produce jobs for our communities? Is it not going to suck our water out? What are we going to be living with, and how do we regulate?
Right. So I do think that regulation can and should play an important part and role in integrating artificial intelligence in a more meaningful way into our lives. We don't want to just release this technology willy-nilly into the world. Unfortunately, that's kind of what's been happening, right? And that's despite the fact that the companies that created their technology in many instances have said, hey, there are huge implications connected to this. And as a society, we need to be thinking about how to incorporate it in meaningful ways so that we minimize the harm to society at large and individuals generally, especially marginalized communities that are already right on the cusp. And so these warnings have been out there. Experts that spend all their time, all day, every day, looking at this technology and thinking about its implications for various industries have also been saying, hey, this is a very big deal. And so I'm definitely a fan of and a proponent of regulation for applications really across the board. I mean, I think that's easier said than done, though, at the same time, right? In order to do this effectively, you need to understand what this technology is, You need to understand where various industries and pockets of society are with their uptake of the technology. You need to understand as well things that I think maybe only a handful of statesmen and stateswomen really do understand. Like, even if you've got a grip on all of those things, you can't just write a bill and expect it to become law and then effectively govern the technology, right? There's a lot of nuance there. And when you've got a situation like we do in our country, in which there's a whole lot of daylight between the position of federal authorities, especially the administration, and state authorities, right? Here in Illinois, in California, in New York, when you've got that kind of mismatch in views here, really the odds of effective regulation coming online kind of fall off the cliff.
Yeah, look, I've noticed even throughout my FBI career, because it was spent largely in counterintelligence and intellectual property protection, that legislation is always behind technology, always. And usually you're dealing with elected officials who, as you implied, don't really understand what they're looking at, let alone how to regulate it. And then what happens is individual states decide, you know what, if you're not going to do anything federally, we're going to start regulating ourselves. And then you get this hodgepodge of 50 different states doing it 50 different ways. Layer into it, and I know this is where my audience is at, much of them, this all comes at a time of incredible distrust of the corporate world, particularly the high tech and the oligarchs and the broligarchs. And they are the ones who are behind this. And then we don't seem to trust our governments. So now we've got this kind of outrage. And it doesn't help that we've got a video of AOC, Sean, showing the allegedly contaminated water coming from a metadata center. Can we show that one?
This is the current drinking water in Morgan County, Georgia. Right after a data center was constructed, the metadata center was constructed. The only difference between the clean water and this was that data center. I have another one as well. So this wasn't just one well. These wasn't just one family's situation. This is what the drinking water now looks like next to that data center. And I think both of us can agree that neither one of these things are drinkable. These families.
Okay, what say you to the larger question of water and data centers?
So that looked like 2 draws of kombucha. What a horrible situation, right? I don't want to speak to the empirical kind of underpinning of what AOC was pointing at there, but more generally, this is a huge issue, right? And it's a very sensitive one, particularly in places like the one that I'm speaking to you from. I'm talking to you from downtown Chicago. We're sitting right, I'm looking out of my window at Lake Michigan right now. And right when you think about the Great Lakes, we're sitting here on 20% of the planet's fresh water, right? Surface fresh water. So incensed around this. People have been super sensitive about this region and its water supply for decades. And this is just exacerbating those concerns. Now, when we look at the situation with respect to the use of water, tapping into natural resources, broader than water as well, one of the things that I try to do and that I recommend, and this gets me in trouble sometimes, but I think again we have to be sober about this, is that we need to take a comparative view, right? AI arrives, generative AI arrives, the hyperscaler data centers, those data centers we were talking about a few minutes ago that the large AI companies need to make and run their models, those come online. And it's easy to imagine that this is the only driver or the major driver in kind of tapping into these natural resources. But if you look at the whole suite of interconnected systems that make our modern world possible, this problem pre-exists this technology, right? If you look at automobility, right? If you look at what it takes to actually maintain this, from my perspective, insane approach to transportation in our country and around the world, you might sober up a little bit. If you look at the amount of water that it takes to maintain, say, the golf courses of Phoenix, Arizona, where I used to live as well,
Yeah.
You might take a slightly different view of this. This kind of perspective sometimes gets me in trouble because it's easy to say, oh, Bennett is just being an apologist here, but I'm not. I'm trying to get us to a place where we back away a little bit from these notions that this technology is singular, that these questions are singular in relation to AI and data center.
That
This is
sounds
not-
fair. And I'll point out that in the examples you gave, whether it's water usage or, well, let's talk automobility, as you say, transportation. We eventually figured out, we're going to have environmental rules, although this administration may not be a fan of those. But we have emissions rules for transportation. We put seatbelts mandatory in cars. Water usage. Cities and towns and golf courses can only do it on certain days at certain times. And yes, there's a massive problem. Something's made the news recently about Corpus Christi, Texas, and they're going to run out of water because of big corporate oil refineries and the corporate users on the Gulf of Mexico. So, yeah, if there's good news, we figure this out eventually. But am I wrong to say that the amount, the volume of water and this exponential growth for a need for water is really something relatively new to us?
It is new in the sense that some of the data centers require massive amounts of it. There's a huge asterisk next to that answer, though, because as you were pointing to and suggesting a little earlier, there are various types of data centers, right? And so some of them are closed systems, largely closed systems. They take in an amount of water, and that water just gets circulated over and over again, right?
Is that kind of the state of the art? Is that the newest version?
Exactly.
Okay, so it's true that kind of model does exist.
Yes.
Okay. And then what? There's other models.
They're older models, right? They're also situations in which you've got such massive data centers. I mean, huge ones that even if you are taking water, say you're shipping in water, you're grabbing it locally, it's still a significant amount of water. And if you are, your listeners who are sitting in the Southwest region of our country right now, I'm sure that they're just shaking their heads, right? Because even if it were just a single bucket of water, it's too much if you're relying upon the Colorado River right now, right?
Yeah.
If you are in North Florida or South Georgia and dealing with that drought, even 3 or 4 buckets of water is too much right now. And so a part of this as well is wrapped up in the larger climate catastrophe that we're experiencing. And so it's a nuanced discussion and a difficult one. And I think that if I had to boil it down, Frank, my suggestion would be everyone that is really, really concerned about this and understands it for the complex problem that it is, they need to do 2 things. One, they need to do everything that they can to understand what a data center means in their local context.
Yeah.
How many are there? If you're here in Chicago and listening to me, you can go down to one of the biggest data centers in the city and take a tour of it. They give tours. You can also use, again, the technology to understand the technology. Talk to Gemini, talk to Claude about these technological infrastructures, right? So that's one. And the second would be organize at the scale of your community. You can exercise a considerable amount of pressure, bring it to bear on elected officials and those companies that own and run and manage the data centers. Work up community agreements with them. Make sure that that you've got a workforce plan that gets your community members into that facility, integrated in a more thoughtful way. These are real possibilities and things that regular people can do.
Yeah, I love this because I love my audience because I know that they are engaged. So they're not just going to kind of hair on fire, or we've got to stop data centers, but rather hold on. We may have to, but we're going to learn about it first. And then we're going to have to engage with our lawmakers and corporate types who are in it for the money. And we're going to have to get our hands around this for our community. I love that idea. As a national security guy, I certainly don't want to get behind the curve from adversaries. like China, who may not give a damn about their pollution and their water, and likely don't. Nor do I want to see the violence that many of my colleagues are predicting. This kind of data centers are going to result in some form of domestic terror. Mm-hmm. And this, we need to get in front of this and understand how to regulate. So if you were czar for a day and you had some regulatory abilities, what things would you be looking to manage and regulate? As hard as it would be, as you just said, with all the corporate types and all the various governments.
Right. So I think that there's several domains in which we really do need to inject thoughtful regulation. And I'm speaking from experience in some regards here. So I've advised some of the elected officials in New York City around one of the, I think it's fair to say, Frank, one of the first really substantive municipal pieces of AI regulation that goes to the application of the technology in the context of employment. And it's really quite vital. This is, I think, one of the lowest pieces of and easiest to reach pieces of hanging fruit here. People need to have some kind of sense of security that whenever artificial intelligence systems or even sophisticated analytics are being used to make determinations about whether you get a job, whether your CV even makes it to a human for review, whether you wind up getting a promotion once you have a job, these types of decisions, we need maximum transparency.
Right.
It's and again, this is one of those things that's easy to say, but very difficult to implement. And so if you're curious about this, listeners, you should take a peek at in New York City's local law 144. It does not even have the phrase artificial intelligence in it, probably thoughtfully, but the approach that the city took to implementing that law and the details that it incorporates will be illuminating. And so employment would be one. Another would be in the context of education, including K-12. And so, not even 2 months ago, I received an inquiry from one of the teachers in our school system here in Chicago, and she was curious about AI-enabled glasses, so smart glasses. And she said, "Hey, I think that 1 or 2 students may be coming into my class wearing these glasses." Right. And I'm not aware of any kind of policy, much less a law to govern this. And she wanted to know what these glasses could do and what she could do about them. Now, these are supercomputers essentially built into glasses, right? Mm-hmm. This is AI enabled spectacles. Yeah. And so don't want to go into much more detail around the rest of that conversation, but it's illuminating, right? These.
Right. We're going to be constantly faced with new questions and dilemmas that require policy, and I'm not sure we're ready for it. On the smart glasses, within the last couple of weeks, Wired magazine found out that Meta had already pushed facial recognition to their smart glasses, just waiting to be activated. But the good news is, even after they said they would not do that, the good news is there was such a public outcry that had happened that Meta allegedly withdrew the push. So we can make a difference there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So this gets us, I think. So I love the jobs thing. I love the fact that when we're promised, oh, don't worry, data centers are going to create 2,000 jobs for your community, we need to scratch. We need to dig deeper. And what really is that true? What kind of jobs? Because we've been through in recent history people telling us, well, factory workers, assembly line folks, they're going to lose their jobs. It's all going to go to robotics. And then people said, well, we're going to take them and teach them robotics, and they're going to program, and they're going to right. And now we're being told, well, never mind, because AI will do the programming. And so we're being inundated with this. And I think we need to be able to call BS sometimes if we're being promised things that don't sound right.
It's a fascinating kind of angle, Frank, that interestingly enough could take us all the way back to the 16th century. Francis Bacon basically said the same thing that you did. His one of his notions was, hey, don't worry too much about new technological systems because they're almost always oversold, right? That's the 16th century.
Yeah.
Many of these questions come back again and again and again in different forms, different guises, but somehow we fail to carry these lessons forward. I think that the same questions that you're putting to me right now, in another 20 years, if we're not careful, someone will be putting to another version of me, maybe a virtual version of me, about say like fusion technology or whatever the new technology is of the day.
Yeah.
We need for each of these technologies something like a nadir, like someone who is public interest oriented, that understands that if you turn your back on the politics of technology, the politics of technology will probably turn on you, as he.
Yeah, I love the idea of another Ralph Nader, and in that vein, maybe one early person that we could be looking at is Andrew Ross Sorkin of CNBC. He was doing a book tour recently, and he mentioned this. He drew a comparison between about 1929 and the ramp up to the Depression, and the financial investments and changes in society that went bust, leading to the Depression. Do you see financial issues where this could be, a gamble that does not pay off and really gets us into trouble?
We're not even a week away from having minted the first trillionaire on the planet by most estimates, partly on the back of this excitement around artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
And so when you have the types of valuation multiples attached to these companies, the most valuable company on the planet is intimately connected to this, even though NVIDIA is not a frontier model creator, it creates the chips that enable that technology. Whenever you have that much concentration of financial capital in a set of overlapping industries, your antenna ought to be vibrating pretty intensely.
Right.
Right?
What is the role of crypto and Bitcoin and these data mining? How is that related to this challenge?
Yeah, I think that there's a significant overlap in the kind of talking heads that promote the two families of technology, if you will. I haven't spent a whole lot of time in several years, honestly, looking at cryptocurrencies and the mechanics there, the computational requirements. I certainly have seen the value of many of those coins drop significantly over the last year or so. Mm-hmm. But I'd be hard pressed to say much more than that about crypto.
Yeah, no, I get it. People know I'm not a big fan, but that comes from my FBI background, and I refer to crypto as the currency of criminals, but that's another thing. Let's go to something that got all of our attentions, and that's the ethics side of AI and data. And no one less than Pope Leo has issued a papal encyclical expressing his concern about AI. Who thought we'd be here? But good for him. We talked about legislation being way behind technology. Well, apparently we've got a pope that's on top of it. So what did you have a chance to look at this, and what are the ethical concerns that bother you?
So, of course he's on top of this, Frank, right? Like, this is Chicago's pope. This is
Chicago pope,
right? Yeah. Pope Leo the 14th is our guy. Yeah. So he understands, right? Like, as all good Chicagoans do, that this technology is profound. And it's super interesting too, right? Because he's not in the weeds about the technical kind of dimensions of it. He's not talking about linear algebra. What is he talking about, really? Right? He's talking about what we need to do to effectively and with a high degree of moral maturation, what we need to do to absorb this technology into society without losing track of what it means to be human. Right? It's right in that title. Right. And so it's pretty fascinating, and it's for many reasons, not just because he's a son of Chicago, but also because when he delivers the encyclical, this is a moment in which he is standing very close to one of the, if I'm not mistaken, one of the co-founders of Anthropic, right there, right? And so you have the AI frontier company that we associate most with responsible artificial intelligence standing right next to the Pope that is telling us, hey, one, you need to pay attention to this technology, and two, you need to keep track of what it means to actually be a human as we integrate it. It's a really profound combination, I think.
And not that I'm ever going to draw comparisons between President Trump and a Pope or Elon Musk and anyone, but you've also got this juxtaposition. You've got these so-called oligarchs who are in control of this, so intertwined with our lawmakers and policymakers and senior government officials that they almost have become one. And we're seeing in the news as recently as this week the waiving of environmental laws and regulations to allow Elon Musk to do his thing, whether it's in Texas or other places. We're seeing in Utah this guy whose name I now forget, who's from the TV show Shark Tank, who calls himself Mr. Wonderful, I think, and he's allegedly wants to build a data center that is the size of Manhattan in Utah, and how can we, the kind of little man, how can we truly raise concerns, educate ourselves, and then make a difference in an environment where seemingly the powers that be control all of this?
Right.
It's Kevin O'Leary is the Shark Tank guy who's building in Utah.
Right. Yeah, it's not the first time, right? It's not the first time that regular people have had to kind of find their backbone, right? To find the energy and really the courage to stand up to very powerful individuals, very powerful industries, right? We've got a long history of doing this, long history. It's not something that happens overnight, but with concerted effort, I would say I would put $10 on this position and say that it's almost always a very deeply informed minority of Americans that wind up igniting broader interest, broader concern, and focusing the energy of regular people against larger forces like this. Right? You can look back at what it took to dig ourselves out of the Great Depression. You can look back and see how long it took for those early environmentalists to actually ignite the imaginations of Americans so that we could get something like the EPA, so that we could have an environmental movement. These things don't happen overnight, but they do happen. And so I think courage, one, and I don't think we have any shortage of that in this country. And two, hope, right? I think that's also something that I'm trying to push for. We can't give up. We have to keep pushing.
Yeah. I like that message. I think it rings true. Speaking of hope, is there any hope for a global, we can't even get our heads together on a state or federal level, any hope for a global approach to regulation, AI, data centers, ethics? We tried this with the environment. We tried the Kyoto Treaty. We have presidents who don't want to sign off to this and help global pollution. But is there any hope of that? And what's being discussed around that?
It's I think the odds are pretty low in the short term. So what it would take to actually first just agree for policymakers and drafters to agree on what a global framework for regulating AI would actually look like. That's a heavy lift for us right now, right? We are in, and we have been for some time now, in a world that is kind of in disarray, right? This is not a kind of unipolar world anymore. It's a multipolar world. And so when you put on top of that the capacity of the technology in question, right, it's much likelier that you get a situation in which, despite what the Pope advocates, you get a situation in which the AI race governs, right? It's the driving force, if you will, in geopolitical back and forthing. And so I'm not going to hold my breath on a global framework for governing it, but I think we can lean in and effectively push for within this country and in other countries in which AI is on the legislative radar screen. We can continue and we should continue to push for regional, say, blocks of countries to agree upon just a floor, really, like what should we not go beyond with respect to environmental issues, labor issues, education issues, military applications as well. But for now, we seem to be locked into a geopolitical race between the United States and China. on this.
Yeah, boy, I'm glad you mentioned the military applications here. Deeply troubling. We have, war crimes understood. We know what is supposed to happen and not, whether we sign off on it or not. Geneva Convention, etc. But we may even have seen perhaps our first huge fatal screw up with the use of AI, and possibly, I say possibly because as recently as this morning, Donald Trump was questioned about this at the G7 in France. He got a question from a reporter about the targeting of the girls' school in Iran. That some are tying to AI targeting and the use of old mapping, perhaps. And so my concern is that if we have ourselves and our adversaries are in a race to most effectively use AI and make it easier to fight a war, and the mistakes that will come from that. So, is there anything going on the national security side that sounds like, and maybe we wouldn't be privy to this, but sounds like policy might be developed and what have you? I'm not that hopeful right now.
Right. It's what a tragedy, regardless of whether AI was involved with that strike on the school and the deaths of all of those children. Like what a horrible thing, right? To have happened. We've got a situation though in which, again, a part of this multipolar world, almost certainly, like history certainly suggests to us that we're almost locked into movement towards a world in which there are more conflicts, and we're seeing this already, right? Yeah. And so, on the one hand, you've got I still want to call them allies that have ongoing conversations with the U.S. about what types of AI uses make sense in what types of conflicts. But you also have instances in which these countries and their proxies are learning as they fight. And so we've got in-field, in-theater kind of operations underway, especially between Ukraine and Russia. We've got a lot going on as well in the Strait right now. Just not even a week and a half ago, we had a really interesting instance of an autonomous vehicle rescuing those two pilots that survived the downing of that Apache at Gulf. Right. So that was Task Force 59, right? That's an outfit that's focused almost exclusively, based on my research, on AI applications in live theater. So they only came online earlier this year, this particular portion of their project. Yeah. And so within 4 months, they're already sending an autonomous vehicle out to pick up these pilots, bring them back to a safe place where a human piloted air vehicle could pick them up. It's pretty amazing, right? It is.
I saw that in the news, and I wanted to know more about it. I'm glad you raised it. So, as with anything and any technology, it could be a force for good. It could save lives. AI likely will and has perhaps saved lives, particularly in the medical area. But also there is this kind of existential concern that in some of the testing, you would know, beta testing, tabletops, we're getting reports that ultimately AI is about preserving itself and not necessarily us, and that in some military testing, reportedly, tell me what you've heard, that the AI will choose the nuclear option, and that's not necessarily ideal.
Yeah, yeah, I've heard some of these stories, and here in Illinois, and especially in the Illinois system, we're like particularly sensitive to this. Some of us are, at least, because for the science fiction fans out there, again, I have to keep going back to it because the connections are so real. If you go back and look at Arthur C. Clarke's incredible work, his incredible novel that became Space Odyssey in 2001, both in the novel, Clarke's novel, and then in Stanley Kubrick's movie, HAL 9000, is born right here in the great state of Illinois. It's a product of, it says that it was brought online in Urbana, so inside of the system. And so I mentioned that, one, because it's a cool science fictional fact, but also because this notion, again, of kind of science fictional notions hanging over these realistic, reality-based kind of calculations and speculations and scenarios that we have to generate, it's very real. It's hard to ignore the parallels between the arcs of those stories, those dystopian AI stories that, again, go all the way back to the early 20th century, and the arc of the stories that we're getting from the sober thinkers here, and so in the military and outside of it. And so it's a troubling notion, and I'm, again, kind of hopeful that we won't have to find out in theater here, but we shouldn't get to that point. We should be advocating for real constraints on the military use of AI in live action.
Indeed. Well, this has been a really thought-provoking conversation. I'm grateful we've had it. I'm sure it's not the last time, and we may be calling on you again, and feel free to reach out to us. I think some takeaways for those, sometimes people join us mid-show and things, but my takeaways here, folks, look, let's start local. Let's start understanding what's happening in our own backyard, county, and state with regard to data centers and AI, then move to confronting the facts and saying, are we really, that we can be inspired by headlines like this one up on the screen here. Communities are pushing back. When you're told it's going to result in jobs, ask some hard questions. When you're told it's a closed system and it's going to reuse the water, don't worry, ask the hard questions. And then with regard to the older models that are creating pollution problems and noise problems, you should demand answers. That's a quality of life issue. And we've got to go with the lawmakers at the state and county levels who have the most opportune time to do something about it, and consider making those corporations pay for what they're doing. The water problem I mentioned in Corpus Christi, Texas, those refineries that are the major users of water, they're like, maybe we'll just leave. They don't seem not to want to pay for desalination and all of that. So it's our opportunity now, folks. Get smart, get engaged on this. It is quite the challenge. You've been listening to Associate Vice Chancellor for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence Strategy, Michael Bennett, University of Illinois, Chicago. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure, Frank.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Take care. All right, that was the first of what I think will be several and continuing discussions on data centers. I wanted to, I wanted to get facts, get my hands around some basic stuff and understanding first, so that we can be more equipped. And I'm personally going to get smarter on what's going on in my community, county, and state. Do not count on the federal government to get their hands around this for any short period of time here, folks. And by the way, that's on a normal administration where technology is tough for lawmakers to understand. In this administration, where I think we're wedded more than ever before between people who are for-profit minded and the senior leaders, we've got a problem on our hands, and it's the answer is going local. Go local, engaged, and get activists out there. Thank you for hanging in there with me. Share this with your friends as the recorded version goes up. Consider subscribing to my Substack and or to Lincoln Square to catch all of this. I've got a brand new column out today by the way, and yes, I'm shamelessly promoting it because there are warning signs and indicators right now that the Trump administration is planning for troops and or federal agents at our polling places in the midterms. I lay out those clues for you in today's column for Lincoln Square. Get it at my Substack or at Lincoln Square. Thanks, folks. I will see you next time. I will likely do a Friday wrap-up this week because a lot is going on, like the so-called Iran deal, which in my opinion is a disaster and not a deal. We'll talk about that more possibly on Friday. Thank you.